Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, August 16th, 2021, and today I'm going to be talking about Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer, who is yet to announce whether or not he is going to be retiring from the United States Supreme Court over the next year and a half, and how this issue will be a very pivotal one, a very crucial one for both parties ahead of the 2022 midterm elections. Now allow me to explain. Who is Stephen Breyer? Who is he in terms of how he has represented the United States? Well, first of all, he's a liberal. He is a left-leaning justice, someone that the Democratic Party has been very happy with for quite some time now, has been, in their sense, on the right side of the court on many social issues, on many important Supreme Court cases. He is one of three remaining liberal-leaning judges in the United States. Justices in the United States Supreme Court. So Democrats look at him and say, he is someone we would like to keep in the Supreme Court, but we also want to be sure that if he chooses to retire or something unfortunate happens, as did with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, God bless her. I mean, that was just so unfortunate to even think about at this point in time. But Stephen Breyer is only 4 years younger than Ruth Bader Ginsburg was when she unfortunately passed away. And that's what Democrats are really worried about. And that's why you're starting to see a number of calls from notable representatives and discussions amongst top Democratic officials, such as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where they're going to the media and they're not directly saying he needs to retire, while many are. Some of the top ones are just saying they don't have an opinion on it, that they would like him to stay in the Supreme Court in a sense, in terms of his ideology, in terms of the way that he votes, in terms of the way that he represents the court, but they do know that practically speaking, that's not always the easiest option. And to just give a little bit of a background, how long has he been in the United States Supreme Court? He's not the longest serving justice. He's served from 1944, 1944 certainly would be the longest serving justice, but 1994 under President Bill Clinton when he was appointed there. Now, he has a bit of a history. He studied at Stanford University, went to Harvard University, shout out there. 1980, he went on to the Court of Appeals, appointed by President Jimmy Carter, so right at the end of that term. So served pretty much in the court for decades now, over 4 decades, going up to 2021. And served in the Supreme Court for over 2 decades. Practically, 26 years? Past 26 years as of 2 weeks ago. So, looking at his history across the courts in the United States, he has a pretty long one, and that's why many Democrats are starting to think about him actually retiring from this position, as 3 Republicans did from 3 vacancies were filled under the Trump administration. Joe Biden has had 0 vacancies to fill in the Supreme Court. The court, ideology-wise, went from what it could have been a 5-4 advantage for liberals to a 5-4 advantage for conservatives, now to a 6-3 advantage for conservatives because of some unfortunate events that happened over the past year. So, all in all, what we are looking at here is that Stephen Breyer is going to be the focal point of 2022 when it comes down to the Supreme Court. This will be a major issue. And like I said, there are progressive Democrats, primarily speaking, but Democrats around the nation that are hinting that Breyer needs to retire. It rhymes, I guess, in their sense for a reason. And the reason why they want him to retire is just to avoid any type of speculation, any type of unfortunate scenario, like what happened back in September of 2020. I mean, could you find a worse time for the Democratic Party for Ruth Bader Ginsburg to pass away? And I kid you not, less than a full month after Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing, Amy Coney Barrett was nominated and put on to the Supreme Court, confirmed by the Republican-controlled Senate. It was 30 days. A full month would be 31. This is something that the Democratic Party really holds to their heart as something that they were very upset about, knowing that Ruth Bader Ginsburg's final wish, as she put it, was to not be replaced before a new president was inaugurated, or before inauguration took place in January of 2021. And I can't even tell you some of the comments that I saw on my channel when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. It was absolutely horrific to see members of the right wing celebrating the same way that people scrutinized the left wing for celebrating when Justice Scalia passed away. You don't celebrate death, especially when it comes to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who has a very large history of, being a champion for women across this nation, regardless of political ideology. I mean, she was a very notable woman for a reason. She was on the Supreme Court for a reason, right? So, looking at her legacy, the Democratic Party was very upset about the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, this swiftness in which that her nomination was put up immediately after Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away and confirmed by the Republican-controlled Senate 52-48. Stephen Breyer was confirmed 87-9 back when he was nominated under the Democratic President Bill Clinton. But he's a little bit different. The Democrats aren't necessarily worried so much that Stephen Breyer could, unfortunately, potentially pass away, or due to health reasons be forced to retire after a Democrat is in office, but they're more worried about potentially losing control of the Senate before they can actually get anything done. You see, looking at the Senate elections in 2022, the Republican Party has been very clear that they want to win back control of both the House and the Senate, as they did in 2014 when they retained control of the House and flipped the Senate from the Democratic Party, flipping a total, I think, of 9 seats nationwide. It was absolutely insane just to see the flip on the map from Democrat control to Republican control. And looking at our Senate map in 2022, Democrats don't exactly have this locked down. While it's probably one of the best maps that we've seen for them in quite some time, there are still plenty of opportunities for Republicans to win in New Hampshire, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona. Those 4 are the most notable swing states, but if it's a wave year, potentially, I don't really see it, but maybe Colorado. Point being, there's at least 1 or 2 or 3, practically 4 pickup opportunities for the GOP, and just 1 would be enough to prevent the Democrats from nominating someone to replace Justice Breyer if he chooses to retire. But the thing about this situation with the Supreme Court is that I expect it to unfold not this year, but next year. The reason why I think that this will be an important issue is because Democrats aren't stupid. They are not going to make the same mistake that they made with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And when Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when there were calls on her to retire, she was in her 70s. When there were discussions about that she needed to leave office or she was hitting 80, right? These calls that were brought upon her, yes. If the Democrats were able to maintain control in 2014, they probably would have asked her to retire, and they probably would have replaced her. But there was a vacancy with Antonin Scalia that prompted the discussion about whether or not you would fill a vacancy in a presidential election year. The GOP said absolutely not. Who does that? There's no precedent for that. Then did it in 2020. Not just in a presidential election year, but in 30 days. It was a very rapid advancement, and now Democrats are saying you're hypocrites. So what I think the Democratic Party is going to do with Justice Breyer is that they are going to, essentially ask him quietly, retire in early 2022 or mid 2022. What does that mean? Summertime, right around that time period in which it would allow the United States Senate to convene, to choose a nominee from Biden's desk, or essentially Biden putting forth a nominee from his desk, and then to vote on that nominee ahead of the midterm elections. But they might hold off. And the reason why they might hold off is because it allows the Democratic Party to not also be hypocritical, as they could have been or could be with Amy Coney Barrett. You see, she was confirmed to the Supreme Court in October at the end of 2020, leading up right into the election. So she was confirmed 30 days after being nominated, and Democrats screamed like crazy. They were so angry. They were saying that this is completely wrong for this to be expedited. This is not a passport situation. This is a nomination to the Supreme Court of the United States. But did Republicans listen? No. It passed by party vote with one exception, Susan Collins from Maine, in an effort largely viewed to save her re-election bid by voting against Amy Coney Barrett, with all the other Republicans voting in the affirmative. It passed 52-48. And because of the Democrats, a move that Harry Reid pulled back in 2013, you could not filibuster Supreme Court nominations. There probably would have been an opportunity for Democrats to do so if they were still in that position where that was an option. But it was not an option. And Amy Coney Barrett probably wouldn't have been able to make it to the Supreme Court had that option been in place. But unfortunately for Democrats, it was not in place. But here's the thing. If they ask Breyer to retire in early 2022 or in the middle of 2022, not near September, not near August, but maybe June, maybe early July at the latest, it will allow Joe Biden to nominate someone who could really not polarize the nation, but captivate the nation. Someone who is out of the ordinary, a historic first. Maybe Biden's going to choose a woman of color. Maybe Biden's going to choose a black woman to nominate to the Supreme Court, just as he made history by choosing Kamala Harris as his vice presidential nominee. What Joe Biden essentially is going to do, I think, is first get Breyer to retire early to mid-2022. With that vacancy, nominate potentially a woman of color, have some type of historic first. It would only really be a first if it was a black woman in the United States Supreme Court, but essentially just try to get someone on the Supreme Court that would be a historic first that Democrats could use to their advantage in 2022. And then the Democratic Party would call the GOP out on hypocrisy. I'm sure we would see plenty of GOP backlash from this nomination going forth in a midterm election year. And Democrats would use that as ammunition. In addition, they would use the potential blockade by the GOP as ammunition, that they don't want to replace Stephen Breyer, even though they replaced Amy Coney Barrett, even though they replaced or refused to replace, Antonin Scalia in a presidential election year. So what will be utilized here is the Democratic Party waiting it out, just waiting a few more months to allow Breyer to make that decision himself, have him retire, fill that vacancy with a nomination, and then allow Republicans to go completely on the offense, use those attacks to captivate certain bases, such as minority groups that wouldn't otherwise be inspired to vote out in the midterms, and pretty much say that if the Democrats don't win in 2022, this nomination will not go through. But if Democrats lose the Senate, as some people expect them to, I don't particularly expect them to right now, but much can change. There's still that lame duck session where there will be about 2 months where the Democrats can still nominate or win that nomination, use that nomination, and pass her or him onto the Supreme Court and allow that to be the nomination filled. And of course, that won't be utilized by Democrats in campaign rhetoric, that they would have that opportunity, but Democrats would. They could utilize that 2 months before they actually have to leave office officially to use that nomination and put someone on the Supreme Court to replace Justice Breyer. So the Supreme Court absolutely will dominate the 2022 headlines in one way or another. I really don't think Democrats are going to take the risk of moving beyond 2022, where they potentially could lose control of the United States Senate. Now, if Justice Breyer was to wait until November, 10th, 2022, allow just a few days to consider whether or not he's going to retire, and then announce fully, I'm out, right? Would Democrats have enough time to nominate someone else and prop them up into the Supreme Court? They technically would and could do it, as Republicans did in terms of how short the time period would be when you're comparing the two. However, you do have to realize that raises questions of hypocrisy because the Democratic Party slammed the GOP at the swiftness of the process, and it also just doesn't make much sense. It doesn't give the Democratic Party any ammunition for 2022. It doesn't nationalize the Supreme Court race, and it doesn't inspire Democratic voters because right now, the Supreme Court is a lopsided court in favor of the Republican Party, in favor of the conservative majority in the SCOTUS. So if Democrats were to use that towards their advantage in 2022, they absolutely could turn out not necessarily record-breaking numbers, but at least enough numbers to hold on to some closer House races, some closer Senate races that they otherwise wouldn't have if Justice Breyer's seat wasn't on the ballot in November of 2022. So some main takeaways here: that looking at the United States Supreme Court, the SCOTUS will absolutely, the 2022 midterm elections, the SCOTUS will absolutely be heavy in terms of its weight for the 2022 midterms. I mean, you are looking at something that hasn't been brought up yet, that many people are saying Breyer needs to retire, he needs to leave the Supreme Court. Just wait. I can tell you right now, Democrats are not going to fumble this, and if they do, then that's entirely on them. But this plan, I think, as I've described it, could work very, very well. It has been utilized in the past to nationalize these Supreme Court seats, as it was in 2020, as it was in 2016, and Democrats would be foolish not to do it for 2022. So when they look at this United States Senate for 2022 and also the 2022 House elections, even though it won't have a direct implication, they would be hugely inclined to put this on the ballot, to make the Supreme Court a nationalized issue, as they have done in the past. I think Breyer is holding off likely for this reason. He knows that there is the possibility that he could be replaced by a Republican, that he could be replaced by a member of the conservative court. And I know that in his heart he is frightened by that. But he also does not want to put this out too early to a point where it won't benefit Democrats. Democrats can knock two birds out with one stone, and I think that they would be very smart to do that. But retirements, if it was to happen for Stephen Breyer, needs to happen essentially in the next coming months. He cannot hold on to 2024. If this plan doesn't actually go through and he holds to 2024, that will be a very poor move. Because Democrats told Ruth Bader Ginsburg, just hold on. Hillary will win the election. How is Trump going to win the election? Nobody thought that Trump would win. And then he did. And she held on for years, for 3.5 years. I mean, you are looking at the Supreme Court, being talked about many years in advance, and Democrats are now in this position where they have a clear opportunity, because no other Republicans are going to be coming close to retiring for the immediate future, that Justice Breyer can leave and benefit the Democrats in the midterm elections. But if he decides not to do it, he cannot wait until 2024. At the latest for his retirement, if Republicans win control of the Senate in 2022, you're talking around the end of 2022. Talking around right then when the Democratic senators are going to be forced to leave in about a month, but can still expedite the process and actually vote on it. If he waits till 2024, it'll honestly be just some type of unfortunate circumstances, some type of unfortunate special election for this Senate balance of power to be completely uprooted, and Democrats will be once again screwed over, as they have been on multiple Supreme Court appointments in the past 4 years alone. So Democrats, if they are to play this smart, if Stephen Breyer really wants to make a monumental impact in both court and outside of the court in terms of the Democratic Party's advancements, they would move forward with this plan to retire in early 2022, mid-2022, nationalize the issue, make it an important part of the 2022 midterms, and then if they end up losing the midterms anyway, they'll have around 2 months to pass the Supreme Court nomination and put the replacement onto the bench, the same way that Republicans did with Amy Coney Barrett from September to October 2020. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.